Well, good afternoon, everyone. I'm really delighted the SPAB has been able to be a formal supporter of this event. Unfortunately, I've only been here today, but it's a really excellent conference. And I think it's going to be one of those occasions we think about and remember for years to come. So well done for turning up. So my brief for this afternoon is to talk very briefly about the SPAB approach to conservation generally, but specifically to windows, obviously. That being largely about care, maintenance and repair. There's inevitably going to be a little bit of repetition of things that have been said already, but I think it's important to point out where we stand in the overall picture. This sits a little uncomfortably in a session about new windows, but I will touch on new windows at times, and I think it is perhaps important also to have those ideas of retention and maintenance as a counterbalance to the need that sometimes, inevitably, there will be a need to have new windows introduced. I have been given a little bit of license to talk about my own views, so I will do that at times. Not all SPAB members, and I'm delighted to see so many of you here today, will agree with every word I say, but the SPAB is a broad church. We've got room for a wide range of views, so, you know, if you disagree with me, that's all to the good, I would say. Now, I'll take it as read that most of you are pretty familiar with the SPAB's long history as the oldest building conservation body in the UK, so we'll say no more about that. But our ideas are very much still rooted in the original manifesto of 1877, and these have been more recently represented for modern audiences in the thing there on the right that we call the SPAB Approach. Now, we believe these ideas are just as relevant to today as they were almost 150 years ago, and to the future. That's the important point. Because they're based on some very straightforward concepts, some enduring ideas about care and about management. It's about valuing what we have, if you like, about doing only what is well considered, justified and thought through, and in thinking of future generations in everything we do. And the last point, of course, relates very strongly to sustainability and climate change. We offer guidance on all aspects of building care and repair, and that includes windows, of course, through our free technical advice line, generously supported by Historic England. Not sure if Catherine is around, illustrated there, who you may find on the end of the phone line. If you've got a window query, give us a call. We also publish guidance in lots of forms, as well as being involved in the Old House Handbook and Eco Handbook, which Marianne co-authored. Mary is here too somewhere up the top there, and we have a window repair video in the pipeline somewhere. So windows have been very much centre stage in our Old House project in Kent, which we've been running since 2018. This project aims to maximise the learning through the repair of a Grade 2 style building at risk. Its ultimate goal is to produce something that's comfortable, habitable, and ultimately saleable, so it has to be fit for the market, and to have good conservation and sustainability credentials. The starting point here for its windows were vandal damage and some really crude replacement of glass just siliconed in to resolve a problem immediately. So along the way, we've already had some beautiful conservation work to the windows, some repairs to the joinery done by Owlsworth IJP, and also reglazing of those windows with some fantastic glass supplied by Christian over there, which really was the only glass that we could find Europe-wide in a way to fit our specific needs. Now, if repair had been the only issue at the Old House project, things would have been relatively straightforward and easy. But the complication for us was that this building had lost its right to be a dwelling through disuse for just about half a century. So re-establishing domestic uses required planning permission. We always wanted the building to be energy efficient, but actually being a new dwelling technically has placed additional requirements on the windows. This has been really onerous, but it's also brought an unexpected benefit in that we've been able to zero rate that window work for VAT, so a welcome unintended consequence. So our windows at the Old House project have not only just had to fulfill those conventional requirements, providing light, energy conservation, they've also had to deal with noise and air pollution, things we've started to touch on today. I think we would almost certainly have considered secondary glazing anyway for its energy efficiency reasons, but perhaps not the internal double glazing that's been demanded by the planning permission we were granted for reuse. So on the right there, this is actually at our HQ in Spitalfields in London, where we've trialled over several years this system of double glazed internal shutters. It's worked very well, and I should say that I tried this on the local conservation officer to see whether we would need consent, and it was agreed that no, this could be done without formal permission. So, you know, quite an interesting precedent there. So our plan was to have something very similar throughout the Old House project, based on this requirement that we had to have double glazing as a secondary layer. And then came the budgetary complication, because the figures came back for something bespoke at around £40,000. And this is only a smallish 3-bedroom house. So from our point of view, that was quite a prohibitive cost. We're now looking at something rather simpler. It's really interesting to hear about Charlie's system, because that would deliver exactly what we're needing. So perhaps there's a conversation about the trial there. But if not, maybe a magnetic double glaze system of some other kind is going to be the solution. Just as an aside, I'd say, I mean, this is quite a shocking thing to me that the planning authority is acknowledging here that this building cannot be used again without mechanical ventilation, triple glazing, all things to keep that hostile environment out. And yet there are thousands of people living in the same proximity to this motorway, which is next door, suffering the consequences of that without any protection. Work at the Old House project has allowed us great opportunity to run courses, to do training, all linked to window repair and reglazing. And it's very much our wish to support window craft skills at any opportunity. So let's look then at some of those ideas within the SPAB approach. So what we do and think is all based on the importance we attach to building fabric, the materials, the design, craft skills, and that embodied evidence of human interaction with buildings over the course of time. And for us, windows are an essential ingredient of that mix. They're vital to the interest of buildings. So for historians like me, you know, has been said earlier in the day, they offer crucial clues through their design, you know, markings and everything else to the way a building has developed and evolved over its life. We'd argue too that windows must be explored and understood before decisions are taken about change. So on the right, we've got this beautiful build-up of windows over time. You know, they're all telling something about changing needs, about the story of the building in its past. And we'd say most strongly, you know, don't try and reverse the clock, turn things back, restore what had been there, because actually you've got a record of the past in that window, which is really valuable. On the left, it surprises me sometimes that people talk about the unblocking of windows as if it's a thing of no consequence. You know, it's an automatic thing that if you've got a window that's blocked up, let's reopen it. It's the logical thing to do. Well, actually, even that is telling us something about the building's story, about what was going on inside, about taxation, maybe. All these things have some importance. Good maintenance. We've heard plenty about that. And for us, it's really essential to building care. It's about responsibility as much as anything, looking after what we have in the present for the sake of the future. Neglect like that is painful, I'd say, to behold. You know, it's so unnecessary, and it's just creating a problem for others to deal with later on. So why not just do those simple things, painting windows, fixing little problems? It's about appreciating the embodiment of natural materials, the energy of the past in what we have now. Where there's decay, we firmly advocate what we call conservative repair, which is about doing what's necessary, but no more than that. So we all know if a window is going to decay, it almost always happens first at the base or on those ledges where the moisture's going to be captured. And we'd argue just for fixing those localized areas, rather than replacing the whole thing, doing those bits on the left there that are necessary to keep that window going for another 10, 50, 100 years. Conservative repair, though, can apply to really any material. So, you know, lovely glass like that, that can be repaired too, and that's worth doing. That keeps the window going. Achieving successful and sympathetic repair requires craft skills. We all know that. But I think traditionally the focus is on stained glass, that high end of the spectrum. People like Helen here do a fantastic job and are rightly appreciated for what they do. But we also need people like Rob, who's there at the back here today, people who are prepared to deal with plain glazing, but really know about the subtleties of that work. Just listening to Rob describe, you know, the symmetry of a window, how he lays out the template and the detailing is fantastic and shows the skill that he holds in this specialism. So, new design then. Well, rather than imitation or pastiche, where something new is needed, the SPAB often argues for good new design, where new windows are essential, and obviously we say, you know, repair what you've got first if you can. We'd say there is a chance with a new window to add something fresh of the present, of our time, that adds that new layer of interest and history to the building, and may also, in doing that, fulfill environmental needs of the present. So obviously, conserve first, but I think these examples, for me at least, illustrate how sympathetic, imaginatively designed new windows can add that extra layer of interest and do that extra efficiency job too. So sustainability and energy efficiency have obviously been key things of this conference, but sadly, I feel that building conservation and environmental conservation and the reduction of carbon emissions, etc., are often seen as at odds with one another. And we at the SPAB definitely don't perceive it that way. So we see building conservation just as one strand of that wider environmental conservation movement, because it's about looking after what we have and those precious resources embodied. So we'd certainly acknowledge that product-led energy efficiency can make a real difference. And we've heard of some great examples around that today. But it's also, as Robin said so eloquently this morning, about the way we use buildings, about the expectations we have of them, things like room temperature, even winter dress. So very interestingly for me, we did a bit of audience insights work recently, and one of the key words that came back from building owners was comfort. Comfortable is what they want to be. And I think we have a real job in talking about comfort, but perhaps presenting it, as Robin said, as something more than just about internal room temperature. But it's a real hot topic at SPAB HQ. You know, we have massive differences of view and arguments even over what is the right internal temperature for our building. So swiftly on to a few personal thoughts, if I may. So this will be obvious to you as an informed audience, but I think it is perhaps worth saying what a great deal we expect of windows today. They've moved from these incredibly small holes in the fabric of building through being something about conspicuous consumption in the Tudor period to being the entire wall itself in recent decades. And I think we easily forget that this is a luxury. It's not just something we should take for granted. And it's maybe a luxury we can't quite indulge to the same degree in coming years. Similarly, you know, it's obviously good that glass is now universally available in homes to everyone, and no one would wish that to be different. But we've lost that sight of glass as a precious resource. It's so often now, you know, as in this horror show here, a throwaway material, something that people just readily dispose of because it has no value and is a nuisance. But I live in High Weald in the southeast of England. Glass making there led to the deforestation of the land in the late 16th and early 17th century. There was a huge environmental cost in producing that glass that today still exists in many buildings in the area. So I think we have to respect these things as a legacy of the past, but with an embodiment of energy involved. We're pretty good today, for the most part, at looking after historic stained glass. So here, York Minster, fantastic efforts went into glass conservation, the isothermal glazing that went with it, you know, very impressive. But we're much, much less good, I would say, at looking after plain glazing. Glass, no more than 100 years old, has those wonderful qualities that I'm sure Christian talked about yesterday, you know, and it's something we should be treasuring, not just discarding, as in the previous slide. Learning from the past, well, secondary glazing first, but I was fascinated recently to discover a reference to Christopher Wren's work at Parliament in 1693, because the Speaker of the House of Commons had asked him at that time to do what's stated there, to double sash the window to keep out the cold. This is the 17th century, and we're already in secondary glazing at that stage. So it's not a new concept, but we are getting much better at it, and really fantastic to hear about some of the systems now around. So I benefit in my office from a really terrific storm system that does a great job at providing energy efficiency for my room sash window. But that's not the only way to do it. You know, if you've got the money, fantastic, but sometimes people need a similar solution, but on a much tighter budget. And personally, I've explored a range of options, from the kind of plastic thing that Marianne showed right through to homemade frames. These are new solutions, but they can work pretty well. I think we shouldn't be afraid of encouraging people to attempt that, even if they can't afford something right at the top end. Secondary glazing point leads me into the discussion that's just sort of starting in this room about listed building consent, where things should stand. I've certainly heard in the past of cases where planning authorities have refused secondary glazing to listed buildings. That's certainly not my position. I hope it's becoming a thing of the past. And I hope we can also see national guidance in due course that talks about secondary glazing as something that should be readily accepted in many contexts. A bit more on learning from the past. Obviously, climate change is a thing of the present and the future, but there are things I think that we can return to and look at to help us forward in these ways. So we've heard bits about timber shutters. I think the extra point around shutters is that sometimes they can be really quite sophisticated in their design, like this one, where you can open up parts to let bits of light in, to partially reduce drafts, or have them somewhere in between. So there are subtleties there that are really important. Blinds, we've heard about that in terms of shading, that's important. But a few here will know, in the middle there, I'm a particular enthusiast for a material called burnt sand mastic, which is not very much talked about these days. This was very widely used in the Edwardian and Victorian periods as that filler in the tricky gap between the timber window and the masonry adjacent. It's just boiled linseed oil and a sort of fine plaster of sand. But the advantage over a mortar is it has greater flexibility. So if you're looking to minimize those gaps around the window edge, it is a traditional material that can work really well and is very simple and inexpensive to use. We've talked at this conference mostly about domestic windows, and that's been probably the focus of much research in the past. But there are other windows out there, and particularly for me, shop windows. Many great historic shop windows still around, worthy of care and conservation, but very poor in their energy efficiency for the most part. I think we're entering a period where if we have a lot more conversion of retail buildings to domestic use, pretty soon we're going to have to start thinking more actively about shop windows and how they can be dealt with for the future to produce a more energy efficient domestic environment. Final point, just 2 slides here and then I'm done, but this one is possibly the most controversial of the things I wanted to say. For many years, heritage organisations have commonly sought window change to reinstate period correctness, if I can call it that. Now, on the left, I've been showing this slide to professional conservation audiences regularly over many years and asking, what in that slide would you suggest we might change? Doesn't have to be anything, but very often the response comes back, we like the multi-pane sash window on the first floor, but we take out that Victorian one on the ground floor. And I think the only basis for that is it looks a bit prettier, maybe, and it's older, maybe, but this has been the basis for a lot of grant funds, and therefore a lot of public money has been channeled into that kind of replacement exercise. On the right, the SPAB is not immune from doing that itself. So this is our HQ building as you see it now, and as it was in about 1980 before it was taken on, we put back the glazing bars. I don't think we do it now, but I'm being as open and honest as I can in saying that that was very commonly done. So what should we now be saying in that kind of instance? On the left, I was out and about and spotted this building last weekend. And I went back and checked. It's not listed. It's got the standard UPVC plastic double glazed windows. And I think if the owners had come out 5-10 years ago, maybe, I'd have said to them, might be a good idea to replace those windows. But I think actually I wouldn't want to say that now, on the assumption that those windows are performing reasonably well, that they embody materials and energy and all those things. Maybe the answer is just to leave them alone. This is an unlisted building. You know, nothing, no offence has been committed here. I certainly wouldn't be saying put UPVC windows into a historic building now, but because they're there already, maybe that demands a different approach. Similarly, on the right, this is a challenge that will be facing me on Monday morning. So this is a building in Worcestershire that the SPAB is taking on. It comes into our hands on the 1st of July, which is Monday. When I first looked at it a couple of years ago, those windows date from, say, 1980-ish, again, not terribly attractive or lovely. And my first reaction was, well, if we replace them, we'd make the building more attractive as a holiday let, that kind of thing. And I think, again, now, on reflection, I'd say maybe we should just leave them alone. They're doing their job, they're sound, they're in good condition, they've been well maintained. If we need to improve their performance, maybe this too is an example where we should be looking at secondary glazing, not because they have great historic interest, but they are an embodiment of something that's already there. So, to finish off, I'd stress, of course, that the SPAB is always open to change. There are many cases where new windows are going to be needed. If the argument's right, the justification is there, that's perfectly fine. And that may serve a purpose in improving energy efficiency. But our starting point is always going to be valuing what we have and caring for it and maintaining it and repairing it as far as we can. Where there is a need for performance improvements, then we'd certainly say it's much better to supplement rather than replacing what we have. Thank you.
That's great. Thank you very much.